Dr. Zakia Yasmin Gates is an assistant professor and director of administrative education programs at Eastern University. And she also teaches writing intensive courses on race and gender at Temple University. She earned her PhD in professional studies from Capella University in 2016. She brings over 20 years of experience from charter schools to higher education, including a pivotal role as director of education at a juvenile facility. Her work champions transformative pedagogy, critical race theory, and social justice, emphasizing intentional leadership and inclusive education for all. Well, Dr. Zakia, I tell you, there's nothing like speaking with educators and talking to someone who is in higher education, but also has the experience of pre-K-12. And that is one thing that I find very exciting about your work. Hello, Co-Press fans. I know that Dr. Zakia Y. Gates has a plethora. She has accolades within her biography, but what we're going to do is I'm going to step back just a touch so that you can learn just a touch more about who Dr. Gates is, and then we're going to continue our conversation. So tell us some more about who you are.
Okay, let's see. As Dr. Zakia Y. Gates, absent of the prefix, but that was my given name by my father, Zakia Gates, Yasmin Gates. So if he was watching, he would say, live up to your name, make sure you include the middle one. So I say Zakia Yasmin Gates is also my doctorate degree right above me too. So Yasmin is right there. So yes, I am an educator. I consider myself being an educator, even though I go by professor according to Institutes of Higher Learning, because I feel as though as an educator with over 20 years of experience that I like to lead people out of ignorance, because we do come to learning spaces ignorant. And I don't mean ignorant as in, wait, I was raised right, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, no, I mean ignorant to the fact of what knowledge is not there just yet, right? But also, what is it that you're not aware of right now, currently? And then, part of that spiritual part of me is looking back at Romans chapter 12, verse 2, when it says, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So again, we all come to some kind of learning space ignorant. Now, how is your mind going to be transformed and renewed so that you don't conform to some of the patterns, quote unquote, of this world? So I like to make learning spaces more transformative, not always like the religious part, but using part of that religious belief, part of my spiritual guidance to make sure that those learning spaces become more balanced. But of course, you got to gain something from leaving this space, not just, okay, that's it, let's go. No, you got to tell me what you gained, what's more of you right now.
Regardless of where people are, I think everyone gains something. Like Every time I'm on my podcast or any time that I'm speaking to anyone, my entire hope is to gain something from them. Even from my students, whoever I am around, I try to do that. And it's interesting that you talk about the spiritual part. I love that because it's a guide for who we can be, who we can become, and how we present ourselves.
Yes. And I have to admit, it took me some time to really get an understanding about that. That's why I think years of experience are so great in our lives, because we need it, because that's how we learn about ourselves, but that's also how we learn about others. So when I did like my little Google search, looking at spiritual and intellectualism, when I see it like affecting our soul, and that intellectualism part, that theory of knowledge, our discovery as to how we even acquire knowledge within our environment. So if I like combine that, it's basically like looking at our knowledge, how we attend about the world, and how that knowledge helps us to shift or again, become more transformative. But then when the spiritual part starts to come in is this making me more humane rather than just a human being? And there's a difference between the two. Like people can have a sense of humanity, and then you have people who are just walking around who's like an empty shell. And you can tell in their behavior, So if I go back to, do not conform to the patterns of this world. Like, who are the current people conforming to this world? People who want to keep racism going. People want to keep sexism going, misogyny, ableism, all these things that people want to keep going because they have already conformed. So they're not looking to be transformed by the renewal of your mind, because it could make you more reflective to some kind of pain, as what James Baldwin said years ago.
Oh, yes. So
Yeah.
you're going to read some literature in this.
Yes.
I feel the literature. I love intellectualism as well. For those of you, I just want to just give you heads up. I am Dr. Jewel White Williams, and I focus on the 8 dimensions or the 8 areas of wellness, and there are a multitude, and they're all interconnected. And what Dr. Zakia just gave us, Dr. Zakia Yasmin just gave to us, I believe in that middle name too. But what she gave us is showing how they all interconnect, and every single one interconnects. And intellectualism is something that not everybody likes to talk about. And that's the reason why I'm being honest with y'all. I know I use the word elated. I'm just excited to have this talk about spiritual, intellectual part of our walk. And as leaders, as educators, I think it's very important that we have a sense of spiritualism or spirituality. And we're not talking about the form of religion. We're talking about the spiritual capacity of who we are, regardless of who you believe in. But it forms us. And the intellectual capacity of what we have, we need to make sure that we're always evolving.
Yes, definitely. And that's a big, huge part of that. Yes, definitely.
Right. So, okay. All right. So we're on there. So one thing I find with leaders, and I think we sometimes become on the overwhelmed side, is that so many new programs or so many new issues come to us at the same time because it is happening now. And I did that intentionally, that we become so overwhelmed with what's happening that sometimes we get lost in that sauce.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And, part of, how can I put this? Part of leadership that we have to really, and I know we're being consumed by so many things that are just coming at every angle. And then it's still, well, how do I still maintain self-care? Where do I find the wellness in this? But I will say that with all of this chaos that's going on, there's still a blessing somewhere. I never want to say in the end, because then when I say in the end, people are like, oh, well, how long is this going to go on? It's not even on our timing, right? But I see this whole thing of just things that are happening so many ways. Yeah. And then how is it that as leaders, we still learn how to navigate? I mean, that's the best thing we can do is to navigate, but to make sure we maintain faith instead of having fear.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. Oftentimes, when people have fear, is you're not allowing faith to be an inaction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not allowing it to be in action. And I'm not going to quote the Bible, but I'm just going to say, but we must have faith, because otherwise everything else we don't believe in. It's kind of dead. It doesn't give its life.
Right.
So when I think of a leader, let's just go back, because you've been in multiple places. Let's think of a leader who has had the opportunity to, because you go deep, you go super deep. I mean, you are in the philosophy of advancing personal and professional missions through social responsibility, transformative pedagogy, and cultural responsiveness for all humanity. How do you even place this in to the pedagogy part, dealing with the understanding of the spiritual and intellectual part?
Sure. So the way I look at this is really understanding the whole person instead of just part by part. And when I mean that, I mean like a holistic way as to how, I want to teach, or, I actually do within my practice. So, for example, I'm also an adjunct at another institution. Mm-hmm. And one of my courses dealt with race and gender. And I really believe in experiential learning. Like, I want you in it. I want you in it. So one of the things that I ended up actually doing was explaining this whole thing about the, in history, this whole thing about the paper bag test. If we are familiar with the paper bag test.
Ooh, well,
and right, here we go, right? So in this class, it was very racially and culturally diverse. And I said, perfect, perfect. So what I did was, before I even told them about it, I said, listen, you know what? I need everyone just to stand outside the door. And they're like, what is going on? So just go outside the door, right? And then I came out and I had them all lined up. Now, there were people passing in the hallway. So they were already looking like, what is going on? They already felt embarrassed. So I pulled out this paper bag and I said, what I need each one of you to do is, in order to get into this classroom, I want you to place your hand in the paper bag, and I want to see if you closely match the paper bag. If you kind of closely match it, or you're a lot lighter than the paper bag, then you're allowed to come in. If you're close to it, a little bit darker, you're going to have to stay out here.
Wow.
So those who were a little bit lighter in the paper bag, they came in. And those were more so heavily melanated, across Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, they had to stay outside the door. And I closed the door and I just started to teach. And they're looking like, what about us? And I'm like, what about you? So I said, okay, here we go. Let's come in as a whole group. And we had a discussion about it. So I said, those who were allowed to come in, how did you feel? And those where you had to stay out, how did you feel? And the ones who had to stay out, they were upset. They were angry. They were enraged. And I said, yeah, you should be enraged. And I said, those who were allowed to come in, how did you feel? And what are your thoughts about the students who had to stay out? They were also upset. And I said, did you find it fair? They said, no, we didn't find it fair. That was totally unfair. I said, well, imagine that years ago and that was put into law. I said, just think about it. And they just all looked around and we had like a reflective moment. I like to, have them write about it, but let's talk about it too and how it actually made you feel. So that was one form of experiential learning. I like to get you in it.
Wow. Okay.
And I wanted to become like more transformative. So when you get out there into the world, you have a social responsibility to your fellow man or woman. You do. You have a social responsibility. And then aligning their disciplines as it relates to, well, if I'm studying to be an architect, what does it have to do with race? I'm like, a whole lot. And I started to explain it to them. But that's how I like to teach courses, because it's more than just learning in the space. It's like, how are you going to take into the world and apply it to your everyday life?
Okay. So you are not challenging. That's not the word I want. You're allowing them to metacognitively process the lessons through experiential learning.
Exactly. That's what I want them to do. Yeah, that's exactly. And that was just one example on top
of many others that I'm sure. And I speak of this on my podcast often, that metacognition is important. It's when you think about your thinking and it allows one to grow and evolve.
Right.
And when we think about our thinking, we have a chance to intellectually expand our prowess, our acumen. And I love that part when we have a chance to use a moment to expound on something that is very relevant.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I mean. Right. That's what I meant from before. Like, they all came into that class ignorant. And I let them know. I said, listen, there are going to be things that are going to be taught and shown to you, and you're going to read, where at the end you'll be calling me all kind of names. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay, because for me to get to you at that particular point as part of your spirit, that's their spirit that's moving. That's their spirit of saying, wait, I thought this way. And now when I come in here and this is done, I didn't know the other side of that. And that's the whole point. I don't like teaching things just from one side, whether it's that class or it's other classes at another institution where I'm teaching. I want you to become more transformative. How are you going to apply it to your everyday life? There's another quick example, if I can bring it in to this space, more of that experiential learning. But again, to your point, getting them to think, why am I thinking this way?
Yeah.
Right. We are in another class, same racially and culturally mixed. And I was teaching about the African-American experience. So of course I had to go back. And I wanted them to have this vicarious experience instead of just reading and looking at images. So luckily, this classroom that I was in, it had carpet. And we moved the tables aside. And I said, I want y'all to feel as though that you're actually in the middle passage. So I had all of them laid on the floor. Wow. And I wanted them to be very, very close together. And I told them to close their eyes. And they couldn't move. And on the PowerPoint, I was playing an audio of, hearing the ocean waves.
Stuff. Yeah,
going up and down and up and down. And I'm just pretty much telling them a story of imagine yourself in this space. Someone next to you happens to die on this long journey to another world, not to a new world, another world. I don't like that language. Yes, another world. It was nothing new. The Native Americans discovered it as nothing new. That's what they did. Imagine that you're hungry and you're getting scraps, or the person next to you doesn't want to eat. And again, they die next to you and the corpse doesn't move. So I'm like, so you'll smell the corpse, maybe the food that you're ingesting on the middle
You're
passage.
pretty much having them figure their senses. They needed to use all the
exactly. I wanted them to have like a sensory experience.
Okay, I need to preface this to a lot of people. And I think it's important. So many times I feel we are misinterpreted or misunderstood when we discuss a lot of history.
Yeah.
So I'm going to preface this, even though I already know your answer, but it's so that it comes from you. How do you research the findings in order to disseminate this information to your students? Because curriculum is huge, and the way in which we create our lesson plans, the way we create the experiences that our students have, and if we are a well-knowledged and well-versed teacher, research has to come into play, especially when you're talking at a collegiate level.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How is it that I know we're running short time, but just give us a little insight, and then I have a question thereafter. But just give us a little insight as to how you research this and take in consideration the age group, the people, the process of them understanding and learning.
Sure. So basically, I use a lot of peer-reviewed journal articles. I have done that. And I educate my students to make them realize that just because something is in print and this person's a scholar doesn't mean that it can't be critiqued. It doesn't mean that there are not some gaps that are here.
But then again, research and all gaps.
We don't like to talk about okay, here we have this person, Bell Hooks, who I'm a huge follower of Bell Hooks' work. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, we can critique her because even she said in her work, no one is far from being critiqued. No one's exempt from being critiqued. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, well, she's asking, let's do a critique. And that's okay to do. Let's find these gaps among these many, many sources. And then what is the final conclusion? Your conclusion, not mine.
Right.
That you can interpret. I never wanted to assert my authority. That even gives me the ick to saying authority. But I don't like to assert my authority over students, whether it's millennial or Gen Z, especially. I just never preferred to do that. And I feel as though that they are open, at least the ones I've had. Mm-hmm. They seem very, very open to the information. They might be kind of quiet at first, but I know the quieter they are, something that they're taking in, especially when they give me direct eye contact. Because I can see it. They never take their eyes off of me. So I'm like, okay, you're getting something from this. And then I have a way where I can create certain questions to get them to actually respond. Because I tell them in the beginning, I'm not going to do all the talking. I don't like to do all the talking. I want to hear from you. But some of the spaces that they have been in have been set up in a way where they can't even show their talents at all. And people will not show their talents to people that they fear. They won't do that. They won't do it at all. But I love using peer-reviewed academic articles. I have actually used some forms of social media. When I see certain things on social media, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know about that. Yeah. Let me go back. Right. Let me go back and do my research.
Make sure it's still accurate.
Let me make sure it's accurate. Let me fact check. Right. Let me go through my own institution's library. Let me find this author. Let me read it for myself. And then again, let me make the connections and then help them to make connections. But again, you figure out the conclusion. That's not up to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you consider the students' intellectual wellness as they learn about history? Because as a teacher, we can disseminate this information, but we also have to look, read their mind. How do you protect their intellectual wellness in the process of this learning?
So key, especially now.
Yeah.
How do we protect it? Well, I think, especially as a people, we need to take it back to history because history impacts where we are today. And I know that based on historical context of the institution of slavery, there were these things called hush harbors years ago. And hush harbors allowed our people to have a safe space where that information was said, where that information was discussed. We worshiped, we got into the spiritual realm, which you were talking about, but it also allowed us to question certain things, talk, absorb, research, but keep it in a safe space. So I think even as Black educators, there needs to be a modern day hush harbor. Now, when we say hush, it's like, okay, no one else is supposed to know. But there are so many people right now on TikTok who are creating these safe spaces to allow Black students to get information that maybe the schools and other spaces are saying, no, we're going to cut off everything from Black history. I don't know what to tell you. But that doesn't mean that we stop. We have to keep going. We have the spiritual intellectual to create these spaces, regardless of what people are doing in DC, regardless of that. So I think we need to, go along that ancestral realm, speak to the ancestors just like they did in Black Panther. We always do that. And create these hush harbors all over again. These safe spaces that are away from everything else that we deem to be very toxic to our spirits.
I don't know what else to say. I think that's kind of like, look, I got a mic right here. If I can just drop it. Bam. Okay. I'm serious. This was so needed. I love my guests. You have I think you realizing that. I love talking to my guests and I vet them intentionally because I want my audience to grasp on and see what's out here. And I've taken it to the point where it's all health related, research related. And then I thought I'd take it and pull it in just a tight list, just a little bit more, make it tighter, and focus on educator wellness. So we can see how all the lesson planning, how we look at the teachers, how we look at the students, and you did it all. Dr. Zakia Yasmin Gates. Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate you being on Cold Press Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love this. I love this. I love the topic. I love the conversation. Very relaxed. So I love this, but I thank you.